Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Crann podcast. Today we have a really interesting guest in the studio, Dr. Alice Moore. Alice is Crann's Research and Impact Lead, but she's also lecturer at UCC's Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy. Alice and Dr. Helen Lynch in UCC were key to the development of the playground and leisure areas, so that's what I'm keen to discuss with her today, the thought process behind this space and how organisations can use that thinking to create spaces of their own and how that links in with the two-generation approach that Crann takes. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you.
You've already had a really long history with Crann. You were key to the development of the playground, and now you're on board in-house. You're seeing how the sausage is made.
Absolutely.
Metaphorically. Do you want to tell me a bit about your own background and what led to your work with Dr. Helen Lynch on the playground initially?
Yeah, so I suppose my background is in occupational therapy, and my interest in research stemmed from a very early stage in that, from my bachelor's through to my master's and subsequently my PhD. So my interest in environments stems from the idea that environments are far more amenable to change than people, and why change a person when we can change the environment. So within that, Helen and I were very aligned in the occupational therapy department in UCC. And subsequently collaborated on many projects over many years, which led us to Crann. So Crann approached us in January of 2020, and from there, I suppose, we met with Cork and Colette initially, and from there, there was initial conversations around, can you tell us what we need for this space? And then there was a little bit from Helen and I saying, it's not just what you need from the space, and we're not the people to tell you that, it's the people that are going to be using the space. So from there, then we partnered up, and an academic community partnership was established in order to identify what the priorities for the space were going to be. So the families were key and front and centre in that. So yeah, a long research project emerged from there.
Fab. So I've heard internally the word engaged research used a lot in terms of, I suppose, a lot of what we do inside here, but what did engaged research mean? What is it, I suppose, if you could explain that? And then, what did it mean for the development of that space?
Yeah, so I suppose engaged research is really about responding to real-world problems. So in this case, the real-world problem was the development of a space that was accessible, usable and inclusive to all. So as well as that, engaged research is about collaboration and that power sharing. So as researchers, we can facilitate the research process, but we're not the right people to answer the questions. So it's that facilitation piece, and the people answering the questions are those that we're going to be using the space.
And how did that look when you were preparing the space? Was it in-person communications? Was it, because obviously 2020, 2021 wasn't the most, it didn't facilitate a lot of that really.
No, it didn't. So the initial plan was to do a lot of in-person research, and as you just alluded to there, the timing wasn't right for same. So we moved to online engagement. So we did a lot of work with children online, teenagers, and then family members that wanted to be involved. So we started with surveys firstly, then we worked with the individual groups, as in children, teenagers and parents or adults as well. And from there, then we were engaged with them on a couple of different occasions. So firstly, it was about identifying what their needs and wants for the space were. And then we developed up a report for builders and so on. And from there, then a kind of a space was drawn up. And then we went back to the service users with that space drawn up to identify what was working, what maybe needed to be relooked, what we needed to relook at, just to I suppose develop a space that was going to meet their needs, wants and desires.
Was there anything that came out of that surprised you? Because obviously from an academic point of view, you probably had an understanding of what you expected to come out of it, but was there anything that kind of surprised you?
I suppose what surprises me is that we're in, at the time it was 2020, and families are still continuing to face the same barriers that they have for many years now, despite a commitment to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We know these issues are long-standing, and yet very little is being done about them. So I suppose that's always the surprising piece.
I know a couple, we've had organisations come and approach us about touring the place and stuff like that. So hopefully a spark has been lit and there's that more spaces can develop. Do you think it's something that is not unapproachable, but there is like a level of misunderstanding about the level of work that goes into a space like this, or do you think it's under or overestimated?
Yeah, I think sometimes there's almost this cookie cutter approach or a one size fits all. And of course, the space that's here in Crann won't work for another organisation because it's designed to meet the needs of the service users here. So it's that. The piece that people don't really look at is that long commitment to engaged research to make it a reality. I think people think it's a quick fix. Let's look at a couple of catalogues. Let's identify what are the accessible or wheelchair accessible, in many cases, components, and let's go from there. Whereas engaged research is that more longer term commitment to really identifying what their needs and priorities are.
How does it feel now, like having been involved since the project's inception, to see the space being used? It must be incredibly satisfying to know that this spark turned into a physical object.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most hitting point always is when you see the fun and enjoyment on children's faces, but it's when families and adults come up to you and say, for the first time, my kids can play together, and that really hits home, in terms of it is a fundamental right for all children to play, and yet the same groups of children are at risk of play deprivation time and time again. So creating a space that really does meet their needs, where they can access play like every other child, is just so important. So seeing it in action is magic. Yeah.
Do you know what I love about it personally is as a sibling of someone with disabilities, is the fact that everything is fantastic for everyone. The siblings playing side by side is just fabulous to see. That's my own spark of joy when you hear the voices downstairs. We'll be upstairs on the second floor of our office, and through the skylight windows we can hear all the screaming and joy. It's fabulous.
And that's that real piece around inclusion, where everyone can play together, because oftentimes when it's for persons with disabilities, it's about accessible components that are for one subset of the population, whereas inclusion is about all. So we really worked with the principles and goals of universal design to really cater for all in one space, as opposed to separate spaces.
And you can see that with the adult clients that come and use the space as well. It's really nice to see that there isn't that perception that it's a children's only space. There's the gym equipment, there's the barbecue area, the sensory garden. It really does. Yeah. It really does have a space for everybody. It's gorgeous to see.
And the need for it to be a flexible space was something that really came out of the research. So where they can extend on the programme offerings here in Crann in terms of independent living and having kitchen facilities, as well as exercise programmes like yoga and so on. So that flexible space was really important.
We don't have the weather at the moment. That's the only thing that's limiting limiting the possibility of the playground is our Irish weather, especially this April. But we've still had camps. We've had our Easter camps and everything in spite of the showers.
So that's a fun happening.
Yeah, exactly. Rain is part of risky play as well. How did you work through some of the perceived limitations around building a space like this? Or what were the limitations around building a space like this?
I suppose with building any space, there's limitations in terms of financial limitations, there's space limitations, and so on. But I suppose really it's about I suppose in Crann is a very forward-thinking organisation with inclusion at the heart of what they do, so that there wasn't any limitations in terms of understanding or knowledge or awareness in that regard. I think it was very much an alignment of the principles that I hold really true, alongside Dr. Lynch and the organisation here being Crann. So yeah, there's limitations always in terms of finances, being able to access equipment. Of course, dare I mention the COVID-19 pandemic, there was those kind of limitations. But in terms of developing a space that's accessible, usable and inclusive, that should never be seen as a limitation. It's all children's right to access these spaces. So we need to do more, and we can do more. We just need to be a little bit more forward thinking and think outside the box.
This is more broad, I suppose, in terms of, and it probably more speaks to your role now as research and impact lead in Stephanie Breakey's absence. But why do you see research and demonstrating impact being so important?
Yeah, I suppose, well, like really we need to demonstrate impact to ensure that what we're doing is effective, sustainable as well as translatable. But I suppose what Crann is doing is quite different. It's a very much a holistic wraparound model of care. That's the 2-gen approach. So that's quite different in a disability sector. So typically services are arranged around a medical model, whereas here it's very much around a human rights model of disability. So seeing people as rights holders first and foremost, and then developing services around that. So because it's so different, of course, there's always a need to demonstrate that effectiveness, so that we can translate that information then out, as well as to support the development of services within Crann. It's also about demonstrating that impact outside of Crann to hopefully start moving disability services in a better direction, so that children, families, adults and so on can access the absolute best care possible.
I liked what you said. Was it sustainability, translatability, and what was the third one you said?
Effectiveness.
Effectiveness. I'll be using those in my marketing. In my marketing in the future. Watch out, listener. Well, look, thank you, Alice. It's been really fascinating to speak to you and get a bit of better understanding of the thought process, the patterns that went into creating this space. Thank you so much for talking about it. Your passion is very obvious. And I suppose here's some more accessible spaces in Ireland.
Absolutely. The more the better.
This podcast has been recorded at the Crann Centre. For more information about the topics discussed in this episode, please see the show notes in the description. For more information about the supports Crann provides to families living with neurophysical disabilities in Munster, please see www.crawncentre.ie.